Many thanks to Keep Hi-Fi for sending me a sample of KBEAR's flagship model for reviewing. The KB16 Cepheus is KBEAR's most expensive IEM to date, featuring 2 dynamic drivers in an isobaric configuration and 6 BA drivers for a total of 8 drivers per side. It retails for just under $250 and is available in both blue or violet. Let's take a closer look. Everything about the KB16 reminds me of my favorite IEM, the KBEAR's Orchestra Lite. The main differences are the KB16 is more expensive, has 2 dynamic drivers for bass instead of balanced armatures, and is vented, while the Orchestra Lite is ventless. Almost everything else is the same. The KB16 has a very similar shaped resin shell with deep wings that fit snugly into my ears. The shell is actually smaller than the Orchestra Lite, so the fit is incredibly good for my ears. They both have resin nozzles, transparent shells showing off the driver placement, and internal tuning ports. They even share near identical accessories, right down to the quantity and color of the silicone tips provided. Looking inside the shells shows a very neat and tidy build, something definitely worth showing off with no signs of glue bubbles or lazy construction. The faceplate is a simple resin swirl of black, metallic blue and glitter, which is again very similar to the Orchestra Lite. There are 2 big differences in the accessories, however. The KB16 case appears to be the same case provided as with the KBEAR's Ether and Eroso, which seems to be a hard-wearing pleather type material on the outside. I'm not a huge fan of these cases, and it's a very low effort case for a product at this price. The KB16 silver cable is also a much thinner gauge than almost any IEM I've tried in this price bracket, which is very disappointing. It tangles more easily than thicker cables and doesn't reflect the price tag. I am, however, a very big fan of how tiny the plug housing is. It's significantly shorter than any standard 3.5mm plug I've seen, so they fit really well into the pocket. This is a welcome departure from the norm, where plugs are actually getting longer in order to accommodate plug switching for 3.5 and 4.4mm plugs. So how do they sound? This is going to be my easiest review ever. They're basically an Orchestra Lite with more bass and a more elegant treble. Switching between the 2, they sound like direct siblings. The fact that they look and feel similar add to the illusion. Long-time viewers of this channel already know how much I enjoy my Orchestra Lite, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that I really like how the KB16 sounds. Despite how close they sound, and nearly how perfectly their frequency response graphs overlay, there is some slight differences in timbre and presentation. KB16 is a touch smoother in both mid-range and treble, despite appearing to have a touch more upper mid-range energy in the graph that is very much balanced out by the increased bass. This gives the effect of being a more relaxing listen overall, but should not be misunderstood as appearing to be less detailed. The Orchestra Lite puts a slightly harder edge to every note, which gives the impression of greater detail and incisiveness. So while it sounds more revealing, I don't think it offers greater detail, except for perhaps in the bass, where it does sound incrementally more textured and clean, perhaps a byproduct of having a more relaxed bass tuning or its use of BA drivers. The ports are front-facing and do a slightly above average job of resisting wind noise. It has the usual dull, rough, cardboard, scratchy kind of sound to it, but at least it's not as clearly audible as other IEMs. Obviously, I don't need to compare the KB16 with the Orchestra Lite. That horse died long ago, so let's start with the KBEAR's Astral. A little more expensive than the KB16, the Astral offers a more V-shaped sound with a fuller sub-bass. The mid-range is less present than the KB16, so instruments and vocals have a more mature presentation on the KB16. The Astral is the definition of taking V-shape as far as it will go before overdoing it, so it's just a more fun, bigger sound. Next, the KBEAR's Ether. Staging is bigger on the Ether with a very clean, dry, and neutral overall sound. The Ether is the antithesis of most IEMs with a soft leading edge to every note, giving a bigger sense of scale and a very understated kind of presentation. Two completely different types of sound. The KB16 in this case sounds more fun, but is still a little reined in. The SIMGOT EA1000. The mid-range resolution and clarity are about on par here, both giving a more lively and musical performance to vocals and instruments than the others. The SIMGOT's weaker sub-bass volume, however, gives the impression of being more detailed and mid-range and soundstage focused. The KB16 Cepheus aptly takes its name from one of hundreds of kings in Greek mythology. Ranked highly due to his association with the gods, the KB16 also fairly joins the ranks of mid-tier bang-for-buck products. However, in this price bracket, I think it might be the most severely lacking in accessories I've reviewed so far, so whether its very tasteful tuning is enough to convince you to ignore that on top of its entirely resin shell build is up to you. We're used to getting a lot of value for money from KBEAR, which has previously meant getting a lot of sound quality per currency unit. Now that there's many of those units attached, I would have expected a lot more product as a whole and value for money. The KB16 is putting a lot of faith in the tuning alone, and somewhat rightly so. It is definitely one of the more carefully crafted I've heard, and I personally enjoy it a lot. But, and this is a big but, the product as a whole is quite frankly disappointing. Maybe just slap on an upgrade cable and it might feel closer to its asking price. It kinda worked for me, but at the same time, I don't think I should have to. That's it for now, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.